Welcome back to CAP STRAT Wealth Updates. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Thanks, Neil.
We got a couple great updates to share with you just on the private wealth side, but then we're going to spend most of the time today on the topic of financially supporting your adult children. And this is a tough one for parents, and it's a big topic, but our objective here today is to make sure that we are just focusing on the framework, the conversation, the trade-offs, and the structure of that going forward. So looking forward to jumping into that here in just a moment. So Mike, why don't you kick it off with just a quick private wealth updates.
Private wealth updates for this month. As we know, it's tax season, so I just want to give one final tax reminder. We've received a lot of questions around 1099s. Those are now available online, both at Schwab and Fidelity. So go download those, provide them to your accountants. One audit item Neil and I wanted to bring up are inflation bonds or I-bonds. If you do own any of those, be sure to download those tax documents as well and provide to your accountant, as that does need to be reported to the IRS, unfortunately. Finally, on the charitable front, for those who are charitably inclined and have given, whether it's through their donor advised funds or one-off direct donations throughout the year, make sure you're providing all those to your accountant as well and receiving the necessary credit for those donations. And then last but not least, last call for any IRA, whether it's Roth or traditional, HSA or small business retirement account funding before the tax deadline.
Yeah, and to the small business point, we'll be working with our clients individually that this does pertain to, but any employee contributions that are due by tax day, we'll certainly be working one-on-one with you on that behalf. So awesome. Appreciate the updates there, Mike. So let's transition to the main topic today, which is financially supporting adult children. And we know this is a big topic, but our objective here is to really just break it down, give some best practices, not only from the parents' conversation standpoint, but also from the children's perspective as well. So looking forward to the conversation here, but just want to state up front that we know there's a lot of unique situations out there, whether it's special needs or different children's learning abilities and skills. We completely understand that and certainly want to be mindful of that. So as we talk through that, we just want you to know that if those situations do pertain to you, there might be some additional planning opportunities that we can discuss, and certainly feel free to reach out to us, and happy to give you some best practices and ideas there as well. So Mike, why don't you kick it off and focus on why is this important?
Yeah, we know that it is impacting over 60% of parents today. We know that's going to vary case by case basis, and that's what we'll get into today, but it's widely applicable, and we're having a lot of these conversations with the individuals and families we work with.
The other part of that is you're seeing more and more children live at home longer, and with the proper strategies and conversations and expectations, you might find ways to move those numbers down a little bit to have your children become a little bit more financially independent. So what are some things the parents should be thinking about?
Parents, something to think about as we approach this conversation. We like to use the oxygen mask metaphor. When you're on an airplane and the pilot comes over to the loudspeaker and says, secure your own oxygen mask first, and then turn to your adult children in this situation, Neil, and then help others secure their oxygen mask, right? So as you're thinking about what you have to do versus what you want to do as a parent, our first point of advice is secure your own financial plan, your own budget, and establish, before you even get into what your kids want or what your kids are asking for, know what you and your spouse can support from your own financial planning perspective, right?
Right. You only have one shot at retirement. And when you are going down this path, it's also starting to identify how much excess you do have. Because we know a lot of families want to continue to support their children or take them on trips or do different things, but you got to start with the base case and making sure that whatever you're doing today is not putting you at a long-term financial risk.
Right. And what are some of the risks that the Wall Street Journal article talked about, Neil, that we've actually seen multiple individuals or families put their own plan at risk for the sake of their children?
So some of those risks are running out of money, by obviously the actions you take today that's going to dilute your retirement assets and portfolio. We've seen a risk of even taking on excess debt, especially when it comes down to college funding and thinking about what the expectations are there. Those are two that just come off the top of my head very quick. Anything else?
Yeah, and like you said, you have one chance at retirement. So it's parents will see sometimes push their retirement date or significantly impact their prospects or traveling or their own dreams in retirement for the sake of funding their adult children's current needs as well.
Yeah, and I think in the context of this conversation, it's like those are choices and decisions, and we're not saying those are all bad things either, because at the end of the day, if that's your number one objective is to continue to support your children, and you're okay with delaying your retirement or delay at or bringing on more debt, which also can impact your retirement spending needs, et cetera, that's okay. But that's where it all comes down to really the next conversation around communication and expectations.
Yeah. Something we often hear asked is, well, who's responsible for teaching that financial literacy, right? And there are two avenues. One is you think about schools, and something that's picking up a lot of traction is mandating financial literacy classes, usually in high school. But we're only finding about half of the states right now have those laws or mandates in place. As we know very well, that curriculum is going to vary differently between districts, even within certain states. And then as we know, half the country is only mandating that education at school. So then that's where we turn back to the parents and say, it really has to start at home, right?
Right. And that's where it goes back to that communication. And, in some examples, you think about one of the bigger one is college education, right? And, understanding what the objective is there. Is it going to be a shared experience, which, giving the child some more skin in the game, or if not, if you're going to pay for the 100% of that, are there any expectations around maintaining a certain GPA or commitment level relative to making sure that they're not, just wasting money there as well.
And even as we talk about, usually at school you can learn what a retirement account is, or how to invest, but you're not going to learn those same amount of values. Mm-hmm. Usually they're family or generational values that you want to instill in your children. So that's where those conversations are important, and we find those come out usually in whether it's a home funding or college education, and can really help drive the outcome, because if that adult child understands the value and the gift of that education, we find that they're a lot more likely to graduate in 4 years and put that degree to a productive use, as opposed to taking 6 years, right, having multiple degrees, but having a really great time maybe on someone else's dime.
Right. Right. So understanding the value of that dollar and tying that back to expectations, what the timeline is, but then what your commitment level is going to be, can also create the better outcomes of making sure the budget doesn't run out of control.
Right.
Right. So Mike, what are some of the hurdles that we might see as we think about parents having this conversation with their children?
Yeah. So great question. It really boils down to ambiguity and emotion. When we say ambiguity, it's just clearly communicating those expectations to children. An example is maybe that your kid didn't know that you had a certain GPA expectation or desire that they move out of your house right after school. So it's really taking the time, and they can be sometimes uncomfortable or difficult conversations, but clearly communicating and having that expectation so both sides are on the same page. And the second one is emotion. We feel a lot of times that parents feel they have this duty or whatnot to support their child at all costs as that ultimate safety net. And we realize that can be emotional, even broaching the subject of tough love, if it's having your child put some skin in the game or learn some lessons and have some short-term sacrifices to build that long-term financial muscle. We know that can be very emotional as a parent, as you're nurturing your child all throughout their life, and then bridging that in a financial subject, especially when they're in mid, late 20s or even early 30s, can be extremely difficult, right?
Yeah. All right. So let's look at the next topic here then, which is, what should adult children be thinking about?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And to really boil it down, if you're that adult child, you don't want to be told what to do, right? Your parents have been telling you what to do your entire life, so you don't want them to set that expectation or that goal for how well you're going to do in school or where you're going to move or what car you're going to buy, right? You want to have, you really want to be setting your own directions and bringing those own goals, up to your parents and acting on them yourself. And starting that conversation proactively rather than just relying on what your parents are giving you or having your parents come to you with that conversation. It's really in charge, as that adult child, you're in charge of your own life and that plan. And those benchmarks and those goals that you should want for yourself, right?
Right. So what's a realistic goal out there?
Yeah, I mean, as we know, if we can talk about housing for a minute.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Very sympathetic for adult children out there. It's a lot harder to buy a home today than it maybe was for their parents 20, 30, 40 years ago, whether you look at, interest rates or purchase prices. But that realistic goal is knowing, okay, first and foremost, what it costs, and then you can start with a down payment, right? You don't have to do it all at once, but based on where your income is, where your budget is as a child, formulating a reasonable standard of living, or even area to search for a home.
Yeah.
And starting there, right? And starting to communicate that to your parents of, I would like to move out, I would like to live here, here's the sort of home that I think that I can afford, here's what it looks like from my aspect of what I can afford to save, and even set my sights on it.
Right, so being proactive on that game plan versus waiting for your parents to tell you what to do, because that can create some unrealistic expectations as well. But I think if you both are working together, especially on that timeline to move out, focusing on coming up with that plan and setting that realistic expectation, whether it's 12, 18, 24 months, can really help with that whole budgeting process, which is critical in any financial independence path, to make sure that not only what you earn, you understand what you're earning, but also what the spend rate on that is as well. The big question is, how can we help? And I think as we started off this conversation, first, putting your oxygen mask on first. This is a topic that we see every day and throughout the conversations we're having with clients and potential clients, and first validating what your access is and can you continue to help support if that's your number one objective. But then two, starting to set the expectations with your children, just based on the outcomes that you want. And we spend a lot of time going through what those trade-offs are, or what the priorities are, to make sure that there's really good outcomes across the board based on the objectives that you laid out. What else, Mike?
Well, and like you talked about setting those expectations, it's having those conversations sometimes directly, whether it's with parents and their children, or even one-on-one with the children. And that's something that part of our services that we're happy to do with the individuals and families that we work with.
So you're absolutely right. We're always happy to have that conversation one-on-one or as a group with the family. So we do appreciate you taking the time here today. I know this is a big topic. It can also be emotional, but it all comes down to the communication plan, and that's something we're always willing to help out with going forward. So reach out if you have any questions, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. Bye-bye.